Welcome back to App Store Optimization, Get Your App Noticed, a Skillshare class by Tyler York. This is part 1, Understanding Discoverability, the Art of Getting Found. When people think about discoverability, they typically think about two primary ways that people find them. The first is through search. So when people search for racing, you want your app to come up at the top of the racing list for them. And the second is having people find you. So if people are looking for a new racing game, they might go to the games category and then go to the subcategory racing, in which case they would find your app on that list. Another way that people find you is through getting featured. So if your app is featured by one of these stores, it gives it a lot of visibility and helps people find you that might have never otherwise looked. However, when you're thinking about discoverability, I challenge you to think about more than just search and App Store visibility. So search is how 60% of people find apps, so it's definitely got the lion's share. Um, and it's what we're going to focus on in this class. But there are a number of other methods for getting discovered, as you can see here, um, and frankly, I encourage you to try all of them. I think that there's a lot of little nuggets in here that are very useful and sort of show you how people can, through a coordinated marketing campaign, find your app in a number of different ways outside of the App Store. But like I said, in this class, we're going to focus on the search side of things and then also getting onto the device homepage with the Getting Featured section. So let's start with the Apple App Store. On iOS, discoverability is driven primarily through search and then the large leaderboards. And I would say maybe in terms of traffic, you would probably see the majority of it come from search unless you have significant leaderboard ranking, in which case the vast majority will come from leaderboard ranking. And search is driven now, after iOS 6, Apple implemented what was called the Chomp update. And so Chomp was a startup that got bought by Apple in about 2010 that focused on sort of like a search engine for apps. And so Apple has implemented their technology into its algorithm to help people find search and search for apps, which is great. But it does mean that the game has changed a bit since iOS 5. So to start, app name is extremely significant, as it always was, but including high-value keywords in your app name is strongly advised, which we'll get to. Your iTunes keywords, so the keywords that you assign to your app when you're submitting it, unfortunately, you cannot change them, which is a little bit frustrating. So definitely try and cram as many in there as possible when you're submitting. If you're submitting for the first time after this class, then definitely try and think out those iTunes keywords as much as possible. Just really get as much as you can in there. And then the number of ratings has a pretty significant impact. Apps with thousands of lifetime ratings are going to do a little bit better than apps that don't have that, even if they don't have as high of a star rating. Though star rating, some people argue that star rating is a pretty important factor now. It's up for debate. But the number of ratings is not, so that's definitely a factor. So Apple also has started including their Genius technology in your App Store searches. So if you have apps that are similar to what you're searching for, Genius will recommend apps that it believes rhythmically, are close to what already exists on your phone. So it includes Genius in that. And then one thing that's been bandied around a little bit that I am not 100% on is external review sites. So basically something to be said about the SEO on the web for your app, and reviews from sort of Apple's trusted review sites, things like all the sort of app review sites that you're pretty familiar with. I imagine that this is probably overplayed, but it might be a factor. And so, getting a good sort of PR campaign around your app launch is advised anyways, and it might help with your search rank. Leaderboard rank is just pure downloads. So it's typically a rolling total of downloads from the last 24 to 48 hours. Some say 24, some say 36, but it's basically your last day's worth of downloads are going to determine where you fall on the leaderboard rank. And you really don't see significant download volume for organic in this way until you get up into the top sort of 100 or really top 25. Once you're in the top 25, though, this can be worth sort of tens of thousands of downloads per day. And if you get all the way to the top 5, it can be more than that. Um, and then velocity is very important. So if the number of downloads that you are experiencing is increasing, sort of your rate of change is increasing, then your velocity is going up, and you're going to get higher ranking. This is why even when you have sort of 10,000 downloads a day, if you go from 1 to 10,000 in a single day, maybe due to a paid advertising campaign, it'll bump you more on the first day than on the second day, even though on the second day you have the same number of downloads. So some key changes with the Chomp update that I want to point out, and with iOS 6 in general, is that categories got buried. So categories used to be a great way to kind of get some niche discoverability, like for instance being number one in the games racing subcategory. And those are now really hard to find relative to where they were before. You have to actually go into like a top 25 list and then go to categories that way. Um, so that's the first thing. It puts more emphasis on search. The second is that Genius is sort of more important than it's ever been for search, and I think that sort of your takeaway from this should be that you should think about what apps that your customers or your sort of target customers are going to have, and then um, try and either advertise on those apps or just, you know, sort of think about what kind of user that is and maybe target your language accordingly. But you should expect that you are going to be easier to find by people that have apps similar to yours, and sort of adjust your marketing accordingly. Furthermore, unlike the Android market, which I think still does this, the Chomp update made it so that there's no bonus from whole phrases. So therefore, um, you know having the phrase best photo editor is no better than just having having photo editor or photo. And that's something that's very different from Android. Android lets you get very specific with the key phrases and can help you that way, but iOS took that away. And the last, which is a pretty important topic, is what I call the keyword tree. So let's take the Beeline RTD example that I mentioned earlier. So the Beeline RTD app is for Denver Rapid Transit, or if you look in the bottom left of that chart, it's DRT. An equivalent for San Francisco is what's called Muni, which is essentially the bus system here. And for the subway, there's the system is called Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART. And so you can see that if someone searches for DRT or someone searches for Denver Rapid Transit, what actually happens is that apps that rank well for bus and for public transit will also rank well for that more specific search. So if you do a little experiment on your phone and you search for DRT on your phone, you'll notice that Beeline RTD is in the top 5, but then another app that is, it's very much like an international public transportation app, is actually ranked higher, even though this person used a very specific search, and even though DRT is not even in the keywords that more generalized app is using. Um, and I'm assuming, just based on how general it is, it's probably not in the iTunes keywords either, because Denver's rapid transit is a pretty small market. So instead, you get the behavior for bus, number one for subway, and number one for these more specific keyword terms, or at least be weighted strongly in those categories. So let's look at an example of a couple examples on iOS. So this is a great example of how not only are total number of ratings helpful, but also the including the keyword that you're ranking for in the app name. So on the left side, I mean they're all whoopee cushions. I think that is pretty self-explanatory. But on the right side, you'll notice that Aviary is not called Aviary; it's called Photo Editor by Aviary. And BeFunky is not just called BeFunky; it's BeFunky Photo Editor, and it's because putting Photo Editor in the name means that whenever people search for Photo Editor, you're the first result. So that's an example of some of these tactics applied to iOS. Now let's talk about Google Play a little bit. So what drives Android discoverability? Android behaves a lot like Google search. So if you're familiar with basic SEO, or at least have an idea of kind of how that worked, Android is going to be more similar to that. So search rank is primarily focused on title, keyword usage, and key phrase usage. And so you can absolutely game your ranking for various keyword terms by manipulating your description on Android, while on iOS, there is very little evidence that that makes a difference, and some think that it's intentional that way. Another important thing for search rank on Android is your install bracket. So if you're familiar with the Android marketplace, you'll know that when you have 100 to 500,000 downloads, you'll be in this bracket, and when you have 1 million to 5 million downloads, you'll be in this bracket. And that bracket seems to have an effect on where you rank. So it's rewarding the more established apps. Now, leaderboard ranking on Android is actually a little bit more complex than the iOS leaderboard ranking, because they got to kind of build the Android market second, and they understood how important it was, but also how much people were gaming the Apple ranking system. So leaderboard ranking on Android is largely done through what I like to call the download rating. So your downloads is the most important part. But then it factors in your install to open rate. So are a bunch of people just installing your app and never opening it, in which case it might be bots, so then you get penalized there. Or if you're using paid traffic primarily, if your traffic is low quality, then the open rate is going to be low. Your uninstall rate. So if people are uninstalling your app quickly, then your ranking is going to suffer pretty dramatically, and that's either because your app doesn't do what it's supposed to do, or because you kind of sold something that didn't actually happen, like you kind of sold vaporware. And so that's how they defend against that, by including uninstall rate. And then your retention. So there is pretty strong evidence that apps with better retention rank better on the leaderboard ranking, and we're not really sure whether that's 7-day or 30-day. It's probably all of the above. But retention definitely plays a factor in your leaderboard rank. So all of that rolls up into what I like to call your download rating. So on Android, an example on the left is actually from before Instagram was on Android. You can see all of these sort of copycats that were riding the Instagram keyword. And so I think it's pretty funny to see sort of like how keywords work on Android, because if you searched for Instagram on Apple and Instagram didn't exist, it would not give you a bunch like it would not be quite the same as this. And so that's just a good example of it. Another way that people discover you, if you look on the right side, is that you actually have two sections here that I want to point out. The first is more by the app developer. So if you have a family of apps on Android, it's very helpful for you to keep them all under one publisher name. So that way you get this like network effect with all of your other apps, especially if they're in similar categories. And then the second thing down here is users also viewed. Oops. Users also viewed is great because you actually basically show up on your competing apps um, pages. And so what you're going to want to do there is make sure that your app is sort of ranking in the keywords, same keywords as your competitors, so that you show up in those slots. Now let's briefly cover the Amazon App Store. This is a newer one and it shares a lot of similarities with Android. You can tell that the discoverability aspect is largely the same. So I'm not really going to elaborate on this too much. We already covered it with Android. But there are some key differences from Google Play, which I want to highlight. So first is that paid apps are noticeably more prominent and successful on Amazon. They have a stronger checkout function. They have more sort of an Apple experience with checkout where it's one click and they already have your credit card. So paid apps see a lot higher conversion rates than they do on Google Play. The second thing is that on web they have this test drive function, and it might be on tablets as well. I'm not sure because I don't have one, but it lets users try paid apps before they buy. Um, and so it kind of gives you that like freemium trial functionality without you having to program it in, which is nice. Um, the second key difference from Google Play is that reviews mean quite a bit more. So on Google Play, reviews are kind of one of the last things that are counted after the keyword stuff. And on Android, star rating is actually very important for search ranking, and user reviews are also much more prominent in the app description. So you'll see that in a second. And then lastly, Amazon has their own free app a day program, which it not only does it kind of benefit the paid apps, but you'll see from the next page that it actually gets better placement than the featured placement. So let's look at the Amazon App Store really quick. You'll notice on the left side that the free app of the day is more prominent than the featured new release. And this is run by Android, so you know it's always going to get great results. And frankly, it's a great promotion tool. You'll notice that the camping checklist is also #1 free due to all the downloads it got. So definitely think about that if you're going into the Android marketplace. The other thing, and I apologize for the poor quality, but it was really hard to find screenshots. You'll notice that the #1 thing on Android's like app description is customer reviews, and it shows the star distribution, which is really kind of unique from app stores. That how much emphasis they put on customer reviews. All right, next we're going to move on to part 2, optimize your description. That will be in the next video. Thanks for watching.